I initially suspected wildlife damage to my wiring. The truth was far more infuriating. Margaret, who presided over our homeowners association, was siphoning electricity from my property to power her BYD, all while smugly acknowledging my security camera as if she had every right. It began with intermittent electrical fluctuations. The light on my front porch would flicker several nights each week around the same hour, and my backyard motion detector would activate without any visible movement. Initially, I dismissed it as faulty equipment or power fluctuations, but then my utility bill arrived, delivering a financial shock. Living solo with minimal air conditioning usage, my bill had inexplicably jumped nearly 40%. That caught my full attention. I methodically examined every appliance, disconnected non-essentials, reset circuit breakers, and even blamed my aging garage freezer. Nothing made a difference. If anything, consumption continued rising. The mystery remained unsolved until approximately 2 a.m. one morning. I had positioned a compact surveillance camera above my rear fence to monitor the alleyway behind my property. Another strange flicker triggered it. When reviewing the footage, there she was, Margaret, wrapped in her expensive silk robe and plush slippers, dragging a bright orange extension cord from her property across the hedge boundary to mine. She crouched furtively, glanced in both directions like an amateur spy, and connected her BYD charging cable directly into my outdoor receptacle near the garden hose. Then she patted the cord approvingly, strolled away humming contentedly, and left her vehicle quietly recharging. I was speechless. I sat staring at the screen as if witnessing some previously undiscovered phenomenon. Margaret, who once penalized me for having my recycling container visible after 9 a.m., was treating my electricity supply as if it came with her HOA position. The following morning I observed her enjoying coffee in her driveway, acting completely innocent. I approached, phone in hand, prepared for a civilized confrontation. I wanted clarity, not drama. She greeted me with an obviously artificial smile. I displayed the video evidence. She barely reacted. She insisted I must be mistaken. She suggested the footage was outdated, or perhaps my outlet was situated on public land, giving her complete rights to access it. She actually described it as community resource sharing and accused me of hindering progress. Then she departed mid-sentence, laughing dismissively. That's when my perspective shifted. I realised this wasn't just someone taking occasional advantage. Margaret had established a routine, a methodology, a deliberate plan. She'd been executing this for weeks, possibly months. The neighbourhood either adored her or, more accurately, feared her. She wielded her HOA leadership like a sheriff's badge in an abandoned town, and everyone avoided confrontation. But I was already beyond the confrontation threshold. She had positioned me there. I didn't report her. I didn't storm into the next HOA meeting waving video evidence like some town crier. I simply smiled. Because if there's one lesson I've learned from residing in this community, it's that Margaret only succeeds when you engage in public conflict. So instead, I became observant. I started monitoring. I checked my surveillance feeds each morning. She returned 3 additional times that week, always nocturnally, always in those slippers as if it were part of her bedtime ritual. I even observed her disconnect the cord with a little celebratory hop like she was proud of her secret charging ritual. So I ordered a smart power monitor, one capable of tracking real-time consumption and alerting my phone when heavy usage initiated. I tested it, calibrated it precisely, then waited. Sure enough, at 1:43 a.m, consumption spiked. I checked the camera. There she was again, humming, connecting as if it were her own property. This time I noticed something additional. She carried a clipboard. She was documenting her usage. That meant she wasn't merely freeloading. She was recording data, which suggested a larger agenda. I began examining HOA newsletters, old meeting minutes, and Margaret's previous proposals. Hidden among the filler content was a section concerning community sustainability. Her BYD wasn't merely a personal vehicle, it represented a campaign. She had submitted a proposal to install a shared charging station using HOA funds, and I was her unwitting test subject. She had been measuring voltage requirements using my outlet. I realised I had 2 options. I could confront her and escalate the situation immediately, or I could allow her continued access while developing something more educational, but that would come later. For now, I wanted to discover her limits. So I left the outlet operational. I even trimmed the hedge to simplify her access. That week she charged 4 separate times. I remained silent. I acknowledged her when I saw her tending her roses. She smiled and inquired whether I'd considered installing solar panels. I nearly laughed aloud. What exacerbated the situation was her smugness. She began speaking more authoritatively during HOA meetings, inserting comments about certain residents contributing more than others, or demonstrating genuine environmental stewardship. Meanwhile, my electricity bill arrived resembling a ransom demand. I still remained silent, but internally I was reconfiguring more than just my backyard circuitry. I was restructuring the narrative. Margaret believed she had established her private energy network, but she hadn't paid attention to the person controlling the outlet. One morning I walked past her residence and observed her BYD proudly displayed in the driveway, charging cable still neatly coiled beside it. I waved. She nodded back, oblivious. That's when I recognized she had grown comfortable, and comfort breeds carelessness. She had no idea that her next late-night connection would trigger something new, something calibrated, something safe, legal, and absolutely shocking. I didn't require revenge, I needed education, and Margaret was about to receive the kind that endures. The following week arrived with sunshine, birdsong, and an HOA newsletter, delivered to every porch like an ominous warning. Margaret had authored the entire front page herself, unmistakably. Her characteristic tone of passive-aggressive optimism permeated every sentence. She praised the neighborhood for embracing forward-thinking energy solutions and announced the formation of a new initiative called the Green Streets Program. According to her, the community needed to spearhead electric vehicle adoption, and she was requesting a community vote on installing a high-speed EV charger at what she termed a neutral location. The neutral location was, predictably, the grassy area directly opposite her driveway. That alone would have been sufficiently annoying, but then came the decisive revelation. Margaret included a bullet point noting that some neighbours had already volunteered their properties for experimental data collection to support the charger proposal. She didn't specify names, but I knew precisely whom she meant. I reread that sentence 5 times, jaw tightening with each reading. She was using my stolen electricity as her proof of concept and framing it as my voluntary participation. I nearly stormed to her house but stopped myself at my doorstep. That's exactly what she wanted. Margaret thrived on reactions, on making others appear problematic. If I arrived shouting accusations, she would transform the narrative into one where I was harassing her regarding a community project. So instead, I returned inside and sat at my workbench. That's where my genuine thinking occurred. I wasn't merely going to stop her, I would make her regret selecting me initially. Over subsequent days, Margaret made herself unusually visible. She hosted an environmental awareness wine gathering in her front yard. That evening, I observed from my kitchen window as she stood beside her BYD, gesturing toward it like a showroom model, while approximately 12 neighbours sipped white wine from disposable cups. She pointed repeatedly across the street directly at the location near her driveway, where she intended to install the charging station. One neighbour attempted to inquire about funding. She dismissed the question casually. "It will come from the beautification budget," she announced loudly enough for me to hear through my window. That fund was designated for seasonal flower beds and playground improvements, not charging her luxury vehicle. The following morning, an official correspondence from the HOA appeared in my mailbox. It was printed on thick, self-important paper and embossed with a gold foil emblem resembling a graduation certificate. The letter accused me of violating HOA Regulation 4.6 regarding unapproved exterior modifications. Specifically, it claimed my outdoor electrical configuration violated rules due to exposed cables and unsightly extension usage. I laughed audibly. She was fining me for the very outlet she had been exploiting. I scanned the document and saved it digitally. Then I opened my computer folder labelled Margaret Voltage and added it to the collection. Her personal digital archive was expanding rapidly. Video footage, dates, screenshots of neighbourhood chat posts, and now this fraudulent violation notice. It constituted more than sufficient evidence to present to an attorney or even local news outlets if circumstances deteriorated. But I wasn't prepared for that yet. There remained additional entertainment ahead. Later that night, I ventured into the backyard with a flashlight and examined the outlet. I disconnected everything, opened the panel, and began installing the new component I'd ordered. It was a surge-resistant smart relay with programmable current threshold capability. In simple terms, it could detect when a high-consumption device like a BYD was connected and automatically redirect to a different circuit, one I had wired with a small surprise. Certainly I wasn't doing anything illegal. The outlet still functioned perfectly for anything below the threshold. Yard equipment, phone chargers, even standard vacuum cleaners would operate normally. But the moment someone drew excessive current, such as a BYD requiring a rapid charge, the circuit would switch and they would receive an immediate burst of harmless but dramatic overvoltage, sufficient to trigger internal safety protocols and send the vehicle's diagnostic system into emergency mode. Harmless but theatrical. Precisely the kind of spectacle Margaret couldn't manipulate. The following night she struck again. I received notification at 2:17 a.m. The power monitor registered a spike. I rolled over in bed, grabbed my phone and watched the live feed. She was bundled in a puffy jacket this time, likely due to cooler temperatures.
Still wearing slippers, still humming, still unaware. I didn't intervene. I allowed her to complete the connection. The smart relay waited the standard 8 seconds, verified the load, then activated. My phone vibrated again as the voltage curve jumped on the display. Her BYD headlights flickered. The dashboard illuminated brilliantly. Margaret jumped backward, arms flailing, stumbling over her own feet and tumbling into the rosemary bush. I watched silently as she scrambled to her knees, looking around as if someone had discharged a firearm. Her vehicle continued beeping, warning indicators flashing frantically. She yanked the cord free as if handling a venomous snake and scurried back through the hedge without even attempting to disconnect from my outlet. She left it dangling.
It was magnificent. The next day she didn't mention anything. No email, no new penalty, nothing in the group chat, but she was quieter, not visibly angry, just disturbed. And I understood why. She didn't comprehend what had occurred, couldn't risk accusing me because she would need to admit her presence. That's the elegance of silent retaliation. Their guilt restructures them more effectively than electricity ever could. 2 days later she attempted a different approach. A random HOA home inspection. A clipboard-wielding board member named Patricia arrived at my door pretending to check for excessive shrub growth. She examined my outlet, asked several foolish questions about my recent electrical work, and made some notes. I feigned ignorance, offered her lemonade, and ensured she observed me applying organic weed treatment to my lawn, nothing warranting citation. But the genuine surprise occurred 3 hours later when Margaret arrived with a BYD technician. I watched from the window as they both knelt beside her vehicle, pointing to something beneath the charging port. The technician appeared displeased. Margaret looked furious. The technician photographed something, made a phone call, and they both departed without acknowledging my direction. That's when I realized my setup had functioned better than anticipated. Her battery remained undamaged, but the onboard safety system had triggered a security protocol requiring manual diagnostics before charging could resume.
Essentially, her BYD suspected tampering, and she couldn't resolve it without explaining what she had connected to, and she couldn't explain that. Not without exposing her entire operation. Not without revealing to everyone that she had been stealing electricity from the same neighbor she attempted to fine for an unsightly outlet. She was trapped, and I wasn't finished. 3 days passed without any additional nighttime activity from Margaret. Her BYD remained untouched in the driveway, still attached to a non-functional cord, creating a scene reminiscent of post-apocalyptic movies. No movement, no energy, no smug morning greeting from her either. Something had changed, but if I had learned anything about her, it was that silence from Margaret never indicated surrender. It meant scheming. And predictably, she returned with renewed vigor and a different strategy, one packaged in glossy print and ribbon graphics. A full-color HOA proposal packet materialized on every doorstep titled Green Future Fundraiser, Charging into Tomorrow. Inside was a comprehensive plan to raise funds for a neighborhood EV charging station.
The proposed location had shifted slightly, no longer directly across from her driveway, but now at the community park perimeter, still conveniently near her property. Her name appeared prominently at the bottom as the interim director of EV strategy, a position that didn't actually exist. The fundraising event was scheduled for Saturday, and Margaret became extraordinarily active promoting it.
Posters appeared at park entrances. Email notifications were distributed daily, and she even hired a teenage resident to circulate the neighborhood on an electric scooter distributing flyers. Each flyer contained a small note stapled to the top, handwritten by Margaret, thanking everyone who supported her test program and energy studies. Again, no specific names, no evidence, just the implication of willing participants. I was furious but also impressed. She was elevating boldness to unprecedented levels, but boldness only succeeds when nobody reveals the truth. I was preparing to expose everything. I began investigating HOA records, public documents that Margaret likely assumed nobody would bother examining. I discovered her recent expenditures listed in small print under discretionary beautification.
The figures were revealing. She had redirected nearly $3,000 into infrastructure consultations and temporary EV usage testing. The dates corresponded with her nighttime connections. Worse, she had submitted reimbursement receipts for extension cords, portable chargers, and garden light timers. She was channeling neighborhood dues into her private BYD experiment, then issuing unrelated violations to others to replenish the fund. It represented a discrete cycle of theft disguised in environmentally friendly terminology. The real breakthrough came when I followed one name from the reimbursement documents, a local contractor listed as having completed a site assessment for the charger project. I contacted his business pretending to inquire about solar installation. Casual conversation led to a surprising admission.
He had never conducted any charger assessment. He had merely received a flat payment to examine a flower bed and pretend to take measurements. Margaret had utilized his name and invoice to demonstrate fake progress to the board. That was my decisive evidence. I recorded the conversation. I wasn't the only one who had noticed something unusual.
Two other neighbours, James and Sarah, stopped me while walking my dog that evening. James served on the HOA board, typically cautious and reserved, but his tone had changed.
He asked if I'd reviewed the new fundraiser document. I confirmed. Sarah leaned closer and whispered, "We suspect she's concealing something."
Apparently, Margaret had recently modified meeting minutes, glossing over votes, and even refused board members access to original budget files. I revealed everything. I showed them the video of Margaret stealing electricity, the fraudulent fine, the smart relay logs, and the contractor call recording. James's expression darkened with each new detail.
He indicated he wanted to address it at the next board meeting but needed support. I advised him not to wait. Let her host her fundraiser. Let her believe the neighborhood still accepted her performance. The larger the event, the more dramatic the downfall. So we waited. Saturday arrived and the park resembled a county fair.
Banners swayed gently. Margaret had arranged tents, a smoothie cart, a raffle table, and a giant display board showing an illustration of the proposed charging station, complete with flower beds and a shaded bench. Predictably, her BYD occupied the central position like a celebrity guest. She wore a wide-brimmed sun hat and a shirt proclaiming, "Drive clean, live green." She delivered a speech around noon, standing on a wooden crate, thanking everyone for their silent trust and calling for unity during this transitional period for the neighborhood. Then she requested donations. There were collection boxes, QR codes, and even a payment terminal mounted on a folding table. I observed from a bench beneath a tree sipping lemonade, watching how effortlessly she transformed deception into applause. But I wasn't watching alone. James had positioned a camera with telephoto lens and was recording everything. Sarah was discreetly distributing small pamphlets we had printed the previous night. They resembled standard HOA bulletins initially, but contained a chronology of Margaret's misconduct, dates, screenshots, financial records, and a link to a private folder containing all video evidence. Neighbours began reading, then whispering, then glancing at Margaret with puzzled expressions. Some paused mid-donation, retrieved their phones and stepped away to scan the QR code we had included. The reaction was swift. The first confrontation came from a man I didn't recognise. He approached Margaret's table, pamphlet in hand, and loudly questioned why she was charging a luxury vehicle using public funds, while issuing fines against veterans and widows. That breached the dam. More people advanced, pamphlets raised, questions multiplying. Margaret attempted to maintain composure, but her voice became brittle. She accused people of defamation, claimed the documents were fabricated, even suggested the video footage had been digitally altered. Nobody believed her. Then James stepped to the front of the gathering and directly asked her to explain the modified board meeting notes. She attempted deflection. He produced the original minutes. He had discovered a backup copy hidden in the HOA's cloud archive. She screamed, literally screamed something about this being a witch hunt, about being persecuted for being a woman trying to create positive change. She yanked the microphone cord from the sound system and stormed away. The crowd dispersed gradually, some silent, others whispering, all carrying the weight of what they had witnessed. The donation boxes remained abandoned. One was empty. The other contained a $20 bill and a neatly folded pamphlet on top. I walked home that afternoon knowing Margaret wouldn't surrender quietly. People like her never do. But I also recognized the momentum had shifted. The neighbors had glimpsed behind the curtain. The whisper network she relied upon to maintain authority had begun speaking openly. Her silence had ended, but so had her influence. The network she had constructed was already destabilizing. And next, I intended to completely disconnect the power.
The following morning, Margaret's BYD was absent. Not parked in the driveway, not even visible within the neighborhood. Momentarily, I thought perhaps she had finally taken it for servicing, but the reality was simpler. She was hiding it. After the fundraiser fallout, her strategy had shifted. The smooth-talking Green Initiative ambassador routine had failed. So now she had reverted to damage control mode, crouching low and striking rapidly where possible. By midweek, HOA notices began appearing again, now with increased venom. 5 households received fines for improper landscape edging. Another received a warning about unauthorized decorative lighting, and predictably, a letter arrived in my mailbox accusing me of operating experimental electrical systems, creating a safety hazard for the community. It didn't even attempt the subtlety. I wasn't surprised. Margaret couldn't take direct action without exposing herself, but she could weaponize the HOA rulebook, distribute notices, and intimidate the less informed. The strange aspect was that even after being publicly exposed at the fundraiser, she continued behaving as if she retained authority.
That indicated she maintained some contingency plan, some angle she believed would preserve her position. So I returned to the beginning. I reviewed the footage again, examined the files once more, and extracted something I hadn't previously considered important. A blurry photograph of a power inverter installed near the community flowerbed by the entrance sign. It had been there for months, concealed under a decorative stone cover. I recalled thinking it seemed oddly placed, but had assumed it was part of the landscape lighting system. Now I questioned that assumption. That night I walked past the flowerbed deliberately, pretending to walk my dog. I photographed the unit and researched the model number. It wasn't designed for garden lights. It was a solar-powered inverter designed for mobile charging, something typically found at fairgrounds or temporary events. Margaret had configured the HOA's lighting infrastructure to supply a hidden charging system. That explained her continued confidence. Her backup wasn't her driveway anymore. It was hidden in plain view, drawing from HOA utilities that nobody questioned because the lights still functioned. She hadn't merely stolen my electricity. She had been depleting neighborhood resources continuously. I knew what action to take. I didn't merely want to expose the system. I wanted to make it impossible for her to deny, but I couldn't tamper with HOA property directly, or she would characterize it as vandalism.
So I developed an alternative approach. I designed a new device, a decoy charging unit resembling a power diagnostics tool. It operated on batteries, featured blinking indicators, and most importantly, contained a small wireless transmitter that would alert my phone the moment any current flowed through the inverter.
I disguised it as a service inspection module, labeled it officially, and attached it to the inverter case using magnetic mounts. It appeared authorized, harmless, and temporary. The following morning, the alert activated. At 3:09 a.m., someone had activated the inverter and begun drawing power. Margaret's BYD had returned, parked discreetly near the park entrance, front end positioned just far enough to conceal the charging port from the main road. I reviewed the footage. She had reversed in like a professional thief and connected to the flowerbed apparatus, then remained in the driver's seat, scrolling on her phone while power silently flowed into her vehicle. I waited until her departure, then walked to the location with a flashlight. The inverter's output connection remained warm. She had charged for over 60 minutes. I documented everything. Photographs, timestamps, consumption readings, GPS coordinates. Then I contacted James and Sarah and presented the findings. They examined the data as if I had provided the blueprint to Margaret's mind. James whistled softly and stated it constituted sufficient evidence to convene a special board meeting, one where Margaret would not preside.
She had been unofficially suspended following the fundraiser fiasco, but now sufficient evidence existed to seek permanent removal. Nevertheless, I advised against rushing. Let her attend the meeting. Let her enter confidently, believing she retained some control. Let her witness everything unravel in real time. The meeting was scheduled for Friday evening. By then, rumors circulated that something significant was approaching. Nearly the entire neighborhood attended, even those who typically remained uninvolved. Margaret arrived 5 minutes late, wearing her characteristic navy blazer and HOA name badge, as if nothing had transpired. She passed the whispering crowd with her chin elevated and sat at the center table like royalty returning to her throne.
But when she looked around and saw James occupying the chair she formerly commanded, something shifted in her expression. James cleared his throat and opened the meeting with a motion to discuss recent utility discrepancies and misappropriation of community funds. Margaret attempted to interrupt, claiming the board lacked jurisdiction to investigate personal usage, but James silenced her by noting that the power drawn from the flowerbed inverter was connected to the HOA's primary meter, not private property. He then displayed a screen share of the data I had collected. Everything was presented calmly, professionally, supported by time-stamped evidence. He even included a brief clip of her BYD entering the park entrance under night vision. Margaret's complexion paled. She stood, attempted to argue about entrapment and privacy invasion. But then Sarah calmly asked why she had concealed a mobile charger under a fake rock labelled irrigation control. Margaret's voice cracked. She fumbled for her phone, tried to deflect, but the room had already turned against her. People were murmuring, shaking their heads. Then someone in the crowd shouted that their HOA fees were overdue because of increased beautification charges.
Another exclaimed that their child's playground upgrade had been postponed again. The momentum transformed into outrage. Margaret finally snapped. She accused James of plotting against her, accused Sarah of falsifying records, and loudly accused me of orchestrating everything because I envied her vehicle. Yes, envy. That was her chosen word.
The room went silent. Then someone laughed. Then others joined. Not cruel laughter, just exhausted, incredulous chuckles. Margaret realized too late that her influence had vanished. Her authority, her image, even her carefully cultivated deceptions. They were gone, replaced by the weight of undeniable facts in a community no longer intimidated by her. She stormed out of the meeting, slamming the door so forcefully the blinds shook. Nobody stopped her. Nobody called after her. And when the door closed, James simply said, "Motion to remove her from all board responsibilities effective immediately." Every hand in the room rose. Nobody objected. That night, the inverter at the flowerbed went dark. The circuit breaker had been disabled. Margaret's final source of stolen power had been disconnected. And for the first time in months, the neighborhood didn't flicker. It remained steady, quiet, rewired, prepared for illumination to return. The following week felt like awakening in a house where someone had finally silenced a blaring alarm. The atmosphere was calmer. Children played more enthusiastically in the park. People smiled more openly during morning walks. And for once, the HOA group chat wasn't filled with veiled threats about garbage containers or lawn edges. Margaret had disappeared from view. No driveway appearances, no clipboard patrols, not even a passive-aggressive quote from her in the Sunday bulletin. But her absence from sight didn't mean she had concluded her activities. People like Margaret don't vanish. They regroup. And in her case, she returned with an accusation. It arrived as a knock on my door at 10 o'clock in the morning, accompanied by two men in collared shirts carrying matching briefcases and rigid expressions. They introduced themselves as investigators from a private claims firm contracted by an insurance agency representing a damaged vehicle owner.
One displayed a photograph of Margaret's BYD. The hood was open, and a technician was indicating a charred inlet port. They wanted to ask me questions regarding an incident involving electrical overvoltage. I invited them inside without hesitation. I presented everything. I showed them the footage of Margaret trespassing, the usage logs, the warnings clearly posted beside the outlet, and even the video of her falling into my rosemary bush after triggering the decoy circuit.
I concealed nothing. My configuration had been legal, grounded, and non-harmful. What she experienced was comparable to connecting industrial equipment without checking specifications. The investigators recorded notes, nodded occasionally, but mostly remained quiet. Before departing, one softly mentioned they would likely recommend no further action, but the insurance company would make the final determination. I thanked them for their time and closed the door, already anticipating what would follow. 2 days later, rumours spread rapidly. Margaret was suing me for damages, not criminal charges, but civil claims. She was alleging I had deliberately installed a malicious device to sabotage her electric vehicle, resulting in repair expenses, emotional distress, and reputational harm. The HOA board received notification, though they lacked authority in civil disputes. Nevertheless, the news circulated through the neighbourhood like wind through autumn leaves. Some neighbours regarded me sympathetically, others with curiosity, and a few, undoubtedly her loyal supporters, observed with quiet satisfaction, likely believing justice had finally found me. But what they didn't realise was that I had one final strategy remaining. And it wasn't petty. It wasn't even about retribution anymore. It concerned ensuring that nobody like her could ever manipulate the regulations, the power, or the people here again. I contacted a friend employed in public infrastructure, specifically municipal planning. I requested assistance obtaining records related to utility grants and local energy rebates. Margaret had mentioned in a previous newsletter that she had applied for an environmental rebate for her efforts promoting clean energy. I wanted to examine her claims. The findings astonished me. Margaret had submitted falsified documents to the city claiming she operated a neighbourhood EV pilot program, sanctioned by the HOA, and supported by signed consent forms from 3 households. She had created a fictional organisation named Green Drive Collective and registered it using a local post office box. Her BYD charger usage, along with several staged photographs of neighbours beside her vehicle, had earned her a modest but legitimate rebate check, just under $5,000. Furthermore, she had submitted an application for a second grant connected to a statewide green infrastructure incentive, currently under review. I organised everything and presented it to the HOA board. James nearly spilled his coffee when he saw the forged signatures on the forms. Sarah adjusted her reading glasses, muttering that she had never signed anything in her life containing the word collective. We compiled everything into a digital report and forwarded it directly to the Grant Oversight Office, attaching the evidence trail and a formal complaint signed by the newly restructured HOA board. We weren't merely responding anymore. We were countering officially and comprehensively. The impact materialized faster than anticipated. The State Grant Office initiated a review, suspended Margaret's pending application, and contacted her for clarification. Within days, she responded with numerous denials, describing it all as a mistake, blaming her accountant, even suggesting the documents had been submitted without her knowledge.
But by then the pattern was too obvious. Her signature appeared throughout. Her email address was listed as the contact on every form. The investigator she spoke with must have recognized the inconsistencies because shortly afterward, the city initiated a fraud review for the rebate she had already received. Suddenly, her lawsuit against me went silent. Then came the unexpected development. I was relaxing on my porch, drinking iced tea when an unfamiliar vehicle stopped at Margaret's house. 2 men in business suits approached and knocked. She opened the door, appearing older, somehow diminished. They conversed briefly before handing her a stack of documents. She didn't slam the door, she didn't shout.
She just closed it quietly and disappeared inside. The following day, a large "for sale" sign appeared in her yard. Nobody commented publicly, but everyone noticed. The woman who once governed the neighbourhood like a petty tyrant was packing belongings in darkness, her driveway empty, her porch light extinguished. The silence she had once weaponized now enveloped her like a vacuum. Nobody offered assistance. Nobody delivered welcoming baked goods. She didn't even attend her final board hearing. James read the findings aloud with the kind of dry precision that only justice can deliver. Margaret's actions had cost the HOA thousands in legal and public relations damages. Her membership was permanently revoked and she was prohibited from holding any leadership position in any local HOA under our county's jurisdiction. When the moving truck finally departed, the entire block seemed to exhale collectively. Children rode scooters along the sidewalk without reprimand. Neighbours conversed longer outdoors, chatting like they once did. As for me, I removed the decoy module from my outlet and replaced it with a locking cover, not from paranoia, but closure. I examined my electricity bill the following month. It had decreased almost 40%, no more fluctuations, no more mysterious surges, just clean, uninterrupted tranquility. Margaret had attempted to build an empire on stolen electricity and partial truths. Ultimately, all she acquired was a damaged vehicle, a collapsed lawsuit, and a moving van that transported her ambitions out of town. She had desired power, and she'd received more than she could manage. A month after Margaret moved away, her former house remained quiet, windows darkened, blinds lowered like the final act of a disappointing play. The "for sale" sign had been removed, but nobody knew who had purchased it.
Several prospective buyers had driven past. One even stood in the driveway speaking with a realtor. But as information filtered through the neighborhood about what had transpired behind those walls and beneath those garden rocks, interest inevitably waned. The neighborhood had progressed beyond her, but the shadow she cast still lingered faintly like residual static after a thunderstorm.
I hadn't spoken her name in weeks, not from lingering fear or anger, but because it simply wasn't necessary. Her name no longer carried significance here. She had once filled our street with tension, notes attached to doors, veiled threats in HOA correspondence, and that omnipresent sensation of being observed, judged, penalized. Now there were just children on scooters again and front lawns returning to whatever shade the sun determined appropriate.
My own yard had never appeared better, not because I exerted more effort, but because I wasn't constantly calculating how to satisfy someone else's arbitrary standards. James visited one afternoon, habitually carrying a clipboard, but holding lemonade instead of violation notices. He informed me the HOA board had finally completed their audit.
They discovered approximately $8,000 in misappropriated funds, all connected to Margaret's self-appointed initiative. Some money was unrecoverable, but a portion had been returned through the grant office after they rescinded her rebate and mandated repayment. The remainder was being addressed through the forfeiture of her HOA deposit and a pending settlement related to her fraudulent claims. The board had approved a motion to use the recovered funds for a community benefit project, something every resident could vote on. I suggested a shaded bench near the playground. James laughed and proposed I should campaign for board membership. I declined. I had no interest in becoming what she had represented, but I did attend the next meeting, and for the first time it felt like a gathering where neighbors actually listened to each other.
No speeches, no ego, no polished banners or fundraising gimmicks. Just people discussing fence repairs and pet waste stations, and finally fixing the crack in the walking path near the tennis court. It felt normal. It felt appropriate. Margaret's lawsuit never reappeared. A brief letter from her attorney eventually reached me, stating they were abandoning all claims with prejudice. No apology, no explanation, just documentation. I signed the agreement and returned it. Not because I feared legal proceedings, but because I had concluded the entire saga. Justice had already manifested, not in a courtroom, but in the emptiness of her driveway, in the blank stares from neighbors who no longer acknowledged her greetings, and in the mirror she was forced to face when nobody else would corroborate her narrative. One morning I received a package without return address. Inside was a thin binder with neatly organized documents. It contained Margaret's original grant application, the authentic version, the one she had submit.